Friends, welcome to part 3 of the super comprehensive video series I made with my friend Laura about the Chaga fungus.
And I had a real light bulb moment where I changed my life and flushed those pills down the toilet and turned to functional and medicinal mushrooms and plants for medicine. I'm very happy to tell you now that many years later, I'm virtually most days symptom-free from this degenerative autoimmune condition that doctors all over the world told me didn't have a cure. I get little flare-ups here and there from time to time, but the skin condition that plagued me for years is gone. My fingers used to look like sausages some days. There was so much inflammation from the arthritis, especially in my knuckles, okay, that I could see it working. This anti-inflammatory medicine, this super powerful anti-inflammatory was growing right behind my house on a fucking tree. And it was hard for me to believe that to be true until it happened to me and it worked.
Friendly warning and spoiler alert, there is more information packed together in one place about the Chaga fungus than any other place I've seen on the internet. So snuggle up, buttercup, get comfy, grab yourself a cup of coffee, or better, a cup of Chaga tea, and maybe a pencil, and let's get into part number 3. But wait, if you haven't already, go back and watch parts 1 and 2 before watching today's video, which is the culmination of those 2 other videos. In part 1, we headed out into the woods to show you how to harvest Chaga ethically and sustainably, and in part 2, we discussed a whole bunch of stuff about the Chaga fungus that won't be covered in today's video.
Okay, so that's probably as good a point as any now that we've covered some of the like nerdy science stuff and some of the health stuff, etc. I think we've covered that sufficiently, or you let me know if we've covered it sufficiently. If you have questions, drop them down in the comments, and maybe Laura and I can pop in there from time to time and answer any specific questions that you might have on those aspects of it. But what we haven't talked about quite yet is preparation and processing and uses, etc. So maybe we get into that. And I did bring a few examples of some different ways of doing that and some different products. Here's a little piece of Chaga that we harvested the other day when we were out on our hike. This one hasn't been processed yet, but I did bring it.
No, and it's pretty thin. Like, so this is a good example of like, this is about as big as I'd probably want to leave it, but it's still thin enough that it naturally dried.
Yeah, that's dried pretty well. I mean, I'm probably going to break this down a little further, but I'll show you, like, there's a few different ways of going about it. So let's start here. So here's just a study specimen that I bring out to all the seminars or workshops that I give, where I show like the way that I like to do it. Chaga comes in a number of different forms when you buy it in a commercial product. Okay, like the most ubiquitous, I think, is the powdered form that you see everywhere, which is great, and you get a really quick water extraction from that because there's so much surface area, but it's kind of a one and done product.
Yeah.
And what I'm talking about is just to show you is this. Here I have some powdered Chaga, and what I do when I'm processing Chaga is I put a cookie tray underneath the thing, and I just catch all this stuff. Let me show you. See that? That's powdered Chaga, and I add that right into my coffee maker, right into the filter sometimes when I'm making a Chaga coffee. But it is kind of a one and done product, like I was saying. I much prefer big chunks of Chaga, like in this bag or in this jar that I had somewhere. I'm going to pull some of these out to show you. These are not fully processed, but I'll give you an idea of the size Chaga chunks that I like. And you can buy these commercially as well. Something like this. Okay, you see that size there? I hope that's focusing for you. That is a great size. That is a multi-use product that you can use over and over and keep adding water to, or do a multi-extraction, a dual extraction, which Laura will get into in a little bit. And you can use this, you can get a lot more out of a piece of Chaga in that format, I feel. Do you feel that way too?
Yeah, I mean, when I tincture, I do it a little differently because it is more a one and done. Yeah. But yes, when I'm brewing...
I'm talking about tea right now.
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't say that.
For tea, I do. I always think, well, if you're Canadian, about a loony size.
About a loony size. Hey, that's pretty good. Okay, for our American friends, let's say it's
a little bigger than a quarter.
A quarter maybe, or I don't know, a half to 3/4 inch. Right? Right? We're metric up here. But so this is the size Chaga product that I use most frequently, and how I get there, let me go back to the study specimen, is just using a saw. I'll cut, often I'll just sort of cut a little grid into the conch like that, and then I'll cut a plank off. Or conversely, sometimes I'll cut planks on a bigger specimen, like long ways so that I have big, long, thin planks, and they're very easy to break with your hands. And it's very little effort to kind of get it down into a size product that will dry very efficiently, and that also is kind of just ready to chuck into a pot of tea.
Totally. I laugh because I have done, I think, every method I've tried.
Me too, I know.
Put it in old pillowcases and smashed it, and I think I still just
drove over with the truck.
Mostly just go at it with a chisel and
yeah, I used to do a masonry hammer, a masonry chisel, and a hammer and all that. I've left all that behind.
Yeah, this is great.
I like doing it this way, and I've even done it with a power saw. I did a video last year. I don't know if anybody saw this on my Instagram where I was literally using a chop saw.
Yeah, you should just put that in right now.
Well, yeah, I'll drop that in to show you. I wouldn't recommend it. It was actually a little sketchy, and it was also on, I think, the reishi fungus. It wasn't even chaga.
Oh, there we go.
But you know, it would be great. My dream is to have a little bandsaw. So say if you're like a woodworking person, or you have someone in your life that's a wood dude, okay, that like makes wood products and has a bandsaw, I can't think of an easier way than just pushing it through a bandsaw.
The thing to remember, it's a very, very hard substance. So to make sure that when you're working with it,
it's fresh.
Yes, fresh.
This is my number one tip. I'm so glad you said that. I was about to forget. So I've actually skipped over a step here. So this is completely dry and hard, and this is like concrete, dude.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to mess with this. I can get through this with a saw, but what I recommend, like, and this is really, really important, is do it shortly after harvest when it's still wet. It is so much easier to deal with.
Easier and safer to break up when it's fresh.
And safer too for your fingers. And I've had a lot of close calls with the old digits over the years, messing with masonry chisels and saws and all kind of things, etc. When it's fresh, literally, like I said, you can cut those 1/2 to 3/4 inch planks off of a bigger specimen or even a smaller specimen and just break them with your hands. It goes like nothing.
Yeah, and then you're doubling by making it easier to dry as well.
Yeah, and you're drying it way more efficiently when you've already got that size than a thing like this.
So then once it's dried, putting it in jars, and it will, how long does it last? It lasts for years.
Like literal years. Yeah, the shelf life is incredible. Now, potency is diminishing over time. That is true, but it's a very slow process compared to other things.
Yeah, and typically, like if you're keeping, like I will try to keep, so I wouldn't put all of my chaga in a jar and keep it right in the kitchen that you're opening and closing that jar all the time. The standard thing with herbs is like, I will keep, you know, if I've harvested some, I mean, again, there's no need to harvest pounds and pounds and pounds of it, but I will keep like a smaller jar in my kitchen that you're opening and closing on the regular to say pull out and make for tea.
Sure.
And then I keep my stock jar that isn't being opened and closed and exposed to that oxygen all the time in my kind of cool dark place in the basement, and then that will preserve for years. And that's like this is a recommendation that I have for all herbs.
100%. And I love that you said jar too. I happen to be like a big proponent of glass jars. This is a non-toxic way of keeping the air out of your chaga or anything that you're doing in the kitchen. You can do it in plastic if you want to. I just wouldn't recommend it. We've got all kinds of science on like the off-gassing of harmful toxic chemicals from plastics, etc. If you can just commit to being like a weird jar guy. Okay, like I'm a jar guy. If you go into my pantry or my kitchen, you're just gonna see like 1,000 jars in there. There's a reason for it. It's non-toxic. Homesteader 101.
101 is get all the mason jars.
And if you knew anything, we're going to talk a little bit about our own personal interactions with this fungus, and I want to tell you a little bit about my health story if you don't know it. I've tried to, in every way possible, remove myself from the toxic stew of the modern world as much as possible, and using glass jars has been a huge part of that in my kitchen and my pantry and my life generally. So yeah, glass and airtight. Okay, so that's pretty much processing. There's a million different ways to do it. You can check out different ones on the internet if you want to. I think from two people who have a lot of experience doing it, I think that's probably best practice. I would call it best practice, is those chunks.
Yeah. Process it down when it's fresh. It's safer and easier. Once dried in an open place that's like low humidity, good airflow.
Yeah.
And then once it's dry, then jar it up and it'll preserve for years.
For a long time. Absolutely. And last thing I wanted to say just on the processing bit of it is that I mentioned this, but it's a really good little trick for getting a powdered product, even though I prefer the chunk style, is when you are sawing whatever it is you're using to saw with, always put a cookie tray or something under and catch that stuff. You wouldn't believe, like, over the years, I have regained or like recouped pounds and pounds and pounds of powdered product that you can use in. People use them literally in baking and stuff, which I don't recommend, but you could. No. You're not getting much out of it doing that, honestly. And anyway, let's. I should have even mentioned it. Don't bother baking it, but you can use it in all kind of different water extractions, and that's another really important thing.
When I make the dual extract tinctures, my preference is to do the powder.
Maximum surface area possible. When we get to alcohol extractions, let's talk about that. These chunks, let's double down on that. These are for tea.
If you're looking to make powder, well, I'll just give people the warning is that it's very, because it's so rock hard, you can break blenders or break food processors or coffee
or
grinders.
Blades or your hands.
So don't try to grind chaga in kitchen
a coffee grind. Yeah, forget it. Forget all that. Yeah. This is with a saw. I'm talking about with a saw and the remnants that come off while I'm sawing those planks to make chunks. That's where I obtain mine.
Yeah, you can. There are certain high-powered blenders. So I actually have a
Super Ninja or whatever. What do they call those things?
Those will do it. They're a little hard. I actually have a food processor from India called a Preeti that's designed for grinding Indian spices.
Fancy.
And the thing is, it's actually just not as fancy, and it's half the price as those.
Oh, killer!
As like a Vitamix.
Shoot me a link. I'll throw it in the description for people if they're interested.
Yeah, they're great. And it's because it's designed and built in India. It's for processing and so it's the one appliance that I can actually grind chaga in.
Right.
And it'll grind it to powder because it's designed to process nutmeg.
Right. Well, unless you're making like a ton of tincture.
Yeah.
Unless you're making a ton of tinctures the way that Laura does in her business, which is a well-crafted forged product company, you probably don't need a great big appliance like that. And just an old saw out of your garage will do just fine.
For getting some,
the way for getting a little bit like that, like I do. But I think this is a really good point too, to point out something that's really, really important that I see skipped over on a lot of chaga videos that I see on the internet, is that while most of the beneficial compounds contained in this fungus are water soluble, not all of them are. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about tea, and let's talk about what that powdered product would be used for in a best case scenario. What would be best practice? Okay, so when we're talking about the chunks that I prefer, we're talking about water, a hot water extraction or decoction, or making tea. Okay, and all that is literally, and I'll drop in some footage here if I have time to dig some up or make it, is taking those chunks, and I have a very scientific way of doing it in my kitchen. I literally have a little tiny pot that has about maybe 2 or 3 mugs full in there. I put a scientific handful of chunks in there, and then I cover that with cold water. So let's talk about this process. There is evidence to suggest that a slower extraction is more effective at getting all of the compounds out, and starting with a cold liquid, cold water, and bringing it up to temperature slowly is most effective. Okay, so start there. Start with that scientific handful and whatever you're using. And a lot of people use a crock pot. Why? Because we're talking about very low temperatures. Many of these compounds are water soluble, but many of these compounds, especially when we're talking about polyphenols, triterpenoids, triterpenes, beta-D glucans, and just antioxidants in general, are not heat stable. Okay, so never boil a chaga tea. It's the number one mistake that I see most people making when they're new at making chaga. We're talking about very long, slow simmers at low temperatures, where if you see the odd little bubble popping up, the French call that a sourire, I think, that little smile, okay, coming up out of the top of the liquid, that's fine, but no further, because those antioxidant compounds are not heat stable. The second you jack that over 212 degrees, the boiling point, you are damaging the goodness. You're damaging those medicinal properties, those beneficial properties that are in that functional mushroom. So keep it long, low, and slow. And this is why a lot of people like to use a crock pot on the lowest setting, or if you're doing it on your stovetop, the way I often do is just on the lowest setting I got on there. And the way that I like to go about it is to always know that I'm going to have a tea after dinner. So tell you what, here's how I do it. I'll put that handful in. I'll put the water into the pot. I'll put the top on that. Cold water, very important. Okay. And put it on the lowest setting possible on my stove. And then I'll start thinking about dinner. And then I'll poke around in my fridge and see what I got. And I'll start making a plan for dinner. And then I'll prep dinner. And then I'll start making dinner and make a bunch of goofy cooking videos about dinner. So subscribe. There's a lot of good wild food and the home cooking videos on this channel as well. But then I'll start making some videos. Then I'll put all that away. Then I'll clean up after dinner. And then once all of that done, probably a couple hours has gone by, and then my tea might be ready to drink. Most studies suggest that 4 to 6 hours is the very beginning of optimal. And there's no too long. You can slow simmer a chaga tea overnight in your crock pot or on your stovetop, but it's long and slow, and you never let it pass that boiling point.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's my crock pots, because I do like to let it go overnight, you know?
Yeah, it's great.
And then
there's no too long.
If you're lucky, like I have a wood stove, and so I have like the little trivet that just rises it, and then I can just put the pot there, and I know it's getting that low and slow heat. But like for medicinal mushrooms across the board, that's the way to approach it, is like low and slow.
100%. So that's the number one tip I hope you take away from this. If you take away one thing from this video and you have some chaga to make tea with, low and slow, don't be in a rush.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you just want to like, again, not boiling it, just making sure it's like just warming. And then, at least 4 to 6 hours overnight. Again, you can kind of like leave that pot on the stove
forever.
But you know, not putting, this is where, crock pot or your wood stove is better, because we don't want to be putting our commercial stove, like leaving our ovens on.
It's a lot of energy. Yeah. I don't leave it on overnight. What I do is and there's some extraction happening at no heat.
Oh, okay? Yeah, you can turn it off, and then just turn it back on in the morning.
Well, or not even. I turn it on, like, even if I'm not going to drink it till the next evening, I'll turn it on an hour or two, or maybe even a half an hour before I want to drink it, because a lot of that extraction has taken place.
It's already.
And the last thing I want to add, just before we get into alcohol extraction in tinctures, which is a fascinating subject, and Laura's is an expert on these matters. She's going to talk about it more. I'm sorry about the expert moniker right now. That's like, we're trying to avoid all that kind of stuff. The last thing I want to add about these chunks, this size product with chaga, as opposed to this high surface area powder product, is that you can reuse these over and over and over again. Remember where I said the powder before, where I was saying the powder is sort of a one and done product? These are a multi-use product. You make tea with your chunks, and because there's so little surface area, because it takes a long time for the water to get into the inner parts of those chunks, you can extract the goodness out of these larger size pieces over time. And you drink your tea, and the tea will tell you when it's done, okay? You can just keep re-upping water. The tea we're drinking right now is 3 or 4 days old, and it's right at about, I would call, what would you call it, like a mid-strength?
Yeah.
I would say I tend to make it very strong, just because I consume a lot of it in the wintertime. So, but this one's been going for 3 days, and it's still perfectly potent and has a lot of good medicine in it, okay? That's because I've added water to it over and over again as I drank the tea. And like I said, the tea will tell you when it's done. When it starts getting watery and tasting kind of gross and not really there anymore, that's when you take those chunks, you put them in your compost, or you chuck them out in the bush, or whatever the hell you do with them. Don't just put them in the garbage. This is a valuable resource for your garden or for the land in general. Okay, do what you're going to do with it. And then once the tea has told you that, the potency is gone, then you add some more. And it's a multi-use product. And I think that's super important. I wouldn't want people wasting big chunks like this on one go.
Oh no, yeah. And again, when people ask like, how long, again, just as long as you're getting a good strong color and it has a flavor, you're still getting medicine out of it.
100%. There's no too long.
Yep.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about alcohol extractions? We've got a couple here. I've got a homemade one that I made. That's a double extraction here. Laura's got a product, a bitter that she makes with wild muskoka. Maybe you could talk to us about that, and maybe this could be a good little prop for you.
Yeah. So when it comes to medicinal mushrooms, there's all this terminology around double extraction. What does that mean? So mushrooms being full of all of these incredible medicinal compounds, it's quite a wide range of compounds. And so some of those polysaccharide compounds, which are things like the D-beta-glucans, those are a type of, so polysaccharides meaning many sugars, like these long chain sugar molecules, they're the ones best extracted in water.
Yeah.
So, and then when we get into some of like the betulinic acid compounds and
betulin itself,
the betulin, those are like tied into these like triterpenes. So, and a lot of these are concentrated in the very dark outer part.
Yeah.
of
Sclerotium.
the-
Yeah, that crusty black
the
charcoal
black
stuff.
part compared to the
Yeah.
more kind of like mocha part in the center. Those are better extracted into alcohol.
100%. Yeah.
And so when we're talking about so if we want to get kind of the full range of the chaga medicine, we can do a dual extract. So what that means is because when we're doing extract, unlike tea where we're gonna like keep adding water and making the most of it, instead of doing the chunks, the finer you grind it, the better is, because when we're making a tincture, it is a one-done process.
Yeah.
So
You want potency.
So
You want to concentrate.
yeah. So in order to get that good extract in that one time, we want to grind it as fine as we can so that we're exposing the surface area. So the first step is to take your ground chaga, and I will typically there's lots of different ways that people will do this, but I do like to 1 part, I kind of do this by weight, and so I'll do like 1 part of the dried chaga by weight.
Yep.
And then I do actually a 1 to 4. So then if it was say 100 grams of dried chaga, then I'm using that 1 to 4 ratio means it's like for the 1 part chaga, it's now 4 parts by milliliter alcohol.
Okay.
And I do because I have access to it, I will actually use a 95% organic cane alcohol. Wow. If you can't get, so if you're down in the States, it's really easy to get 95% alcohol. Up in Canada, you can either get it, you have to kind of ask for it. LCBO can be really expensive.
Or you can get this. I brought actually a bottle of so sorry to interject, but like this is 76% by volume alcohol, and this is highest you can get over the counter.
It'll still work for sure. And I'm definitely like, I'm a practical herbalist, and there's the
ideal
doing what makes ideal, and then do what works.
So what you can do at home. Yeah.
But when we say high alcohol, we want to use at least 75%.
This would be a minimum.
Yeah. Up to 95, because if you use say just your regular vodka, when we do the dual extraction part, when I get to the second part, our end result tincture won't be high enough alcohol to preserve it.
Right.
That's
right.
the key. So the higher, long term. So the first part is to take your ground chaga, and you can do these weight volume ratios, and then.
Can I stop you there for 1 second? I just have a question, because you're more knowledgeable about me than I am on this particular subject. Now, I've done a ton of alcohol extractions and tinctures, etc., but you do this for a living. I found it curious or interesting that you talked about a 4-to-1 ratio. The standard that I've like always worked with myself is 5-to-1 or 7, like higher. So tell me why I should be doing, or explain to the folks why maybe a lower ratio is better.
I mean,
does it matter?
Yeah.
First of all,
it just depends on your individual. Because I'm doing maybe the higher alcohol, but
that makes sense too. You have a higher alcohol by volume. You don't need as much.
But every herbalist I've learned from, which has been many, does their extracts a little bit different, and they have their reasons why. And it's one of the
So what's your 4-to-1 thing? I'm just curious. It's just like a total. I don't know. I'm curious. I've always done 5-to-1 because I was told like that's sort of like some sort of ideal thing that's beyond my pay grade to understand.
But I'm working with like dried roots. And harder barks, and I use mushrooms kind of the same. For it, but I've done them in a number. I just want like a nice. It gives you a bit of a stronger.
It's a higher concentrate.
It's a higher concentrate.
So if you're buying a product from Laura, you're getting more for your money, I guess too. Like you're getting a higher concentrate. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's kind of the thing.
And then I will use the same mushroom for doing the water extract.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Which some herbalists will actually say take their chaga and weigh half of it out, weigh the other half, and only
use a fresh batch. Okay.
Yeah. So and I've done all of the kind of different methods.
I've tried a few too. Yeah.
Yeah, and
I don't find a particular difference in the results, to be honest with you.
There's
marginal maybe. Yeah,
every herbalist kind of has the way that they do it, and I recommend try lots of different ways.
Yeah.
But the key thing with a dual extract, so whatever weight volume ratio you use, but
sorry to interject. I was just curious.
I've seen everything from 4 to 10.
Okay.
And it's just depending on the herbalist. Again, because we don't necessarily have the end result data from human trial studies of exactly the dosage.
There's no right answer. I'm just curious.
There's exactly one right answer. So that's just the method that I've done, but I have done in between.
Yeah.
But
well, that's a good, strong, potent extraction for sure.
Yeah. So I will do. So you're soaking your ground up chaga in the alcohol as the first step, and I let mine sit at minimum 2 weeks, but at least a month. They can sit for longer. I always think of it when you're making tinctures, it's like a sponge. And so once the menstruum, which is what the liquid is, so your alcohol is called the menstruum. So once that menstruum has absorbed the constituents from whatever herb you're extracting, in this case the chaga, it'll basically, it's now a sponge that is full, and then it can just sit there. So we say at least 2 weeks, but it can kind of go longer. For me, typically I like to let it sit for a month, and then after a month,
you read 4 to 6 weeks everywhere, but it doesn't have to be that. You don't have to be dogmatic, I think, about any of these aspects of it, right?
Yeah, if you're in a real rush, you can do it, in 2 weeks. But if you, like for me, because I'm never in a rush and I'm doing it more methodically, we do it at a month.
And also volume, right? You're doing big volumes.
Yeah. Ish. We're not a huge company.
Well, I mean, compared to what I do at home, or you might do at home,
but we're much smaller than anything you'd be buying at like a big health food store.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So we will press out. So then we're basically, dumping the whole extract through a bag, and then we have a hydraulic press at our kitchen. So then I can press all of the liquid out of the mushroom.
Amazing. I use a lemon press at home.
Yeah, use what you've got. Lemon press, whatever you can squeeze, and that's where gravity can be. So you can even let it drip overnight or whatever, just to try to let gravity do some work. But so that's the first step. So now you have in say 1 jar, you've got your alcohol extract, and if we've pressed it out. And so some of the liquid will have absorbed into the mushroom, and you won't recover that back. So if we put 400 milliliters of liquid into the, you're not going to get 400 out.
Yeah,
probably
some
get,
stays
say,
back.
350.
Sure, which is pretty good.
Yeah. So let's say we got 350 milliliters. So now what I'll do is, this is the dual phase part, is now we're going to take that mushroom, the chaga that we had, extracted the alcohol from, and we're going to put it in a pot, and I will so if I got 350 milliliters of alcohol extract out, I will get 700 milliliters, so I double the amount of water.
We're going to reduce it, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to put it in, I'm going to take that 700 milliliters and I'm going to put it onto the what's called the mark, so basically our chaga that we've extracted, put it on, and then we're going to basically just make that tea.
Right.
And we're going to put it, again, I could put it on cold.
And low and slow.
Low and slow. So low and slow. The ideal is that it actually evaporates down, so that what you end up, and this is the tricky part.
Finding that half,
Totally. And then once you think it's reduced by about half, then you can press out the spent chaga, and ideally what you then have is 350 milliliters of your alcohol extract, 350 milliliters of your water extract, and then you combine the two.
And it's really important to note, I think, here, and that was awesome, to note why we're doing it. So some of these, while most of the compounds, the beneficial compounds contained in the chaga fungus are water soluble, some of the most beneficial ones are not. You can only get them via alcohol. So the reason we're combining them is to get a completely full spectrum medicine where you get all of that stuff. Now you can make tinctures, and you can speak to this better than me, where you're really just aiming at, and what would the compounds be that you're aiming at just with the alcohol? We're talking about the benzoylic acid, right, and the triterpenes, etc. And then, sorry, I'll let you take this here.
Oh yeah, but this is just where it's I'm such an advocate of full
spectrum,
whole herb, holistic herbal, which is using all the parts, and so it's that's why it's I use the whole chaga, all of the different parts, and you want to use
it grew together. They were meant to be used together.
And it's so interesting, when you make the extract, the alcohol part will be this blonde color.
Right, yeah.
And then the water extract will be black. All the
melanin in there.
So it shows you that the melanin never extracted into the alcohol.
Yeah.
And then the interesting trick is you have to add the alcohol content extract to the water, not the water to the alcohol.
I think I've messed that up before.
Because if you subject, so you never want your water extract to go above 40% alcohol.
Okay.
And so by because if you add the water extract to the alcohol, then those very first drops you're adding are being subjected to the high alcohol.
Got you.
And the polysaccharides will drop out of solution and bind up.
Right, and you're reducing potency.
It'll bind it in a way you can't absorb.
You're not going to be able to use it in your body.
You have to always.
That is so interesting. That makes perfect sense now that you explain it.
Yeah, and then sometimes you can. Again, things I have learned from my other herbal teachers, and I do when I'm doing, like, I will make different mushroom tinctures that we're just using personally, but that you can also add sometimes glycerin to help stabilize some of the polysaccharides,
I've heard that,
a sugar compound just to kind of like hold things. But yeah, so it's a really fun process to do that, and you can chaga. You can also do it with like lots of other different mushrooms. In our fungi king class that we do, we actually we go. Because it's a multi-part class, we collect mushrooms over the course of several months, and then we make at least 9, sometimes 12 different mushroom tincture that we do from mushrooms that we've collected over the course of the program.
That's so cool. I gotta come and hang out at one of these and just check it out, man.
Yeah.
Totally.
But yeah, so that process, so that's when people talk about dual phase, what they mean is you've taken an alcohol component and you've extracted the alcohol, soluble compounds, and then you take water, you get all the water soluble compounds, but the reason why, this is where it goes, the reason why it has to be, you have to use high alcohol is because when we combine that 50% alcohol extract with the water, so if it was say 95% alcohol, we reduce by half, so now we're looking at something.
You're still over that 40 mark. It's still for preservation.
You can still do, like with 75% alcohol, it still works because you need at least 25%. So if you think of like a liqueur that sits on a shelf at the LCBO, they're all generally around wine. Like a liqueur is generally about 20%. So when we're talking about herbal tinctures that are preserved at shelf stable long term, is that they are at least 25. So if you're making an extract, if it's we're going to end up with something that's between 30 and 40% alcohol.
Which is great. So 25% would be like a minimum for shelf stability. Okay.
Yeah. And then so if we're getting up at least above the method that I showed, if you're starting, say, with 75%, you'll still, and that's why we say 75% is your bare minimum. Yeah. Because then we're going to make sure that we have the alcohol percent that we need to preserve. So beyond just being able to get some of the compounds, we can also make tinctures because then for ease of use. Yep. So now you have something that, if you don't have the time or maybe you're on the road. Again, I prefer to have the teas for kind of longer term use, but I also do like having the tinctures because, again, you'll get those compounds that you wouldn't otherwise.
That you can't get, yeah.
And then they're also something that you can use very easily.
Yeah, and you can throw a drop of that into a tea. Yeah. And still get a little bit of it or whatever. There's a lot of ways to use. I mostly just put them under my tongue.
Yeah, like my mushroom, because I make one that has chaga in it, and I also use reishi. I really love using mushrooms together. I think about how in the ecosystem, these mushrooms all grow together. Yeah. And so I like my medicines to like reflect the environment. So I always like having mushrooms together. And so I use reishi and chaga, really lovely ones to put together. And
they're very complementary in terms of their functions. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I put cacao and cinnamon to like make them tasty, and like I'll put that in my coffee, and it's like great when I'm traveling and like.
Totally.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you just on double extractions. Mm-hmm. I've heard of many people doing it the other way around, where they do the hot water extraction first and then do the alcohol. Do you have what are the caveats? What's to know about doing it or not doing it that way?
Yeah, it's just different. Is
it a potency thing? You're still getting all the same stuff, it seems to me.
Yeah, it was how like the method I was taught from my teachers was to do the like alcohol first. And then
is that because of the dilution thing of keeping it above 40%? Is there some way that it could be messed up if you did the hot water extraction first and then you were adding it to the alcohol?
Yeah, you might.
Or alcohol too. Not really though.
Yeah, you might be adding take all that out because I was taught to work with dried, like for extracting dried mushrooms. So if you've cooked them first, then you're adding the water to them, and so it's gonna be trickier to get.
Okay, yeah. So you would recommend, basically, I think the long and short of it, because I don't want to muddy the waters here. The long and short of it is just do the alcohol extraction first on a double extraction.
But just know that, like, also, if you're on a longer herbal path and learning try different methods and see which one you like.
I've tried it both ways and I didn't notice any particular difference, but I consume enough of it that it, who knows how much I would even notice because I use it so frequently.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, cool. So there's the two like major ones that we can do at home. It's worth noting, like really quickly, like there's a third way of extracting, there's a number of different ways that require like really specialized equipment.
Oh, there's lots of different commercial extractors.
Like a lot of the stuff, the tinctures, etc., or other medicines that you might buy online from a purveyor of that kind of thing. Those are very expensive machines and machinery and scientific equipment that we don't have at home. So we as foragers I'm not particularly concerned with, getting the hyphal, the slightly different concentration of X compound from the hyphae of the Chaga fungus inside that heartwood, etc. I mean, I'm sure that there's a ton of benefit to that stuff. In fact, there's science on that stuff. There is, etc. But we can't do it at home, and we shouldn't even really be concerned with it. These are the two most common and easiest ways of doing things at home.
At home, yeah. If you're buying, it's ease of use. Like a lot of those pre-extracted products are so that you can end up with a powder that you can just instantly add to coffee.
Yeah.
And so it's like they've basically made these complex extractions. A number of
for convenience
are dual phase extractions, and then they basically take all the water out of it, and it's just like it's the instant coffee version of chaga.
Yeah.
And so it's not that there's anything wrong with those. You're just they're for convenience, and so you're paying often high, like they're expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
a lot more expensive than learning how to do it sustainably and ethically yourself, and learning from people like Laura and myself costs you nothing.
Yeah.
And forever too. That's the one thing I love about teaching these courses is that, I have like correspondences and relationships that I'm sure you do, as you do too, with students that develop over years, etc. And it's just seeing just how much goodness people can get out of just like an afternoon of sitting down and learning some stuff, and then like have a lifelong skill that carries them through, their own health strategy and their own wellness journey for the rest of their life. And just being a small part of that is like really, really rewarding.
Yeah.
And
well, how about your wellness journey there? There's a good segue.
Oh yeah, we haven't even talked about our personal experience, so we should probably wrap it up. This video is getting crazy long. I might break this out into multiple parts, or who knows, maybe it's going to be one big long video. But I'll just do like the really short version of my own story since you asked, and I'd like to hear maybe how you and Chris use this particular fungus at home, etc. As you know, if you've watched the very first video on this channel, I want to highly recommend to go back, and if you want to know a lot more about me, if you're curious at all, I go into much more detail there about this. But the sort of like short version of the story is that I was very, very sick for a long time with a degenerative autoimmune disease, psoriatic arthritis. It's a polyarthritic condition. That's not only, an autoimmune disease, but it has some very terrible physical effects. There was a time not too long ago, like 8 or 9 years ago, where I had difficulty picking up a coffee cup most days. I couldn't use my hands, and this disease is in my spine and all my joints, etc. And I was being prepped by doctors all around the world for like, well, you better start getting ready in your head. It's wheelchair. It is a very serious degenerative condition, and you're done, son. Like we're going to manage it from here. That was the expectation at that point. And then being on very harsh chemotherapy drugs for almost 6 years that I was taking.
To suppress the immune system.
To suppress the immune system because of the type of condition that I had. And then those chemotherapy drugs were wrecking a whole bunch of other parts of my body that weren't sick. And honestly, the cure that I was being sold was worse than the damn disease for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'll spare you the gory details of the disease, but my skin condition that came with this thing was awful. It was like my skin would crack down to the flesh. My hands and all over my body was bleeding all the time. Like it was painful to take a shower or go swimming. Literally, like I would grab a thing and there'd be blood on it. And this was years of it, and like horribly painful all the time. And compound all that, and I'll spare you some of the really gory details of the disease, but compound all that with this methotrexate, this chemotherapy drug that I was taking in a much smaller dose than a chemotherapy patient would be taking it. But nonetheless, I didn't react to it well, and barfing every time I took those things. And it was wrecking my liver, and I had to go see other doctors and get weekly blood tests to see just how bad this stuff was wrecking all the other parts of my body and monitoring my white blood cell count and red blood cells and my liver. And I stopped being able to process certain kinds of foods. And anyway, just like a nightmare of other symptoms on top of the symptoms. I got so fed up with this after I moved back to I had moved back to Canada like very recently after my divorce, and I was so fed up with the side effects and living with this thing, I started doing research on my own about my own condition and started realizing that a lot of these autoimmune conditions were diet-based and stress-related and lifestyle-based. And that was literally the day that light bulb went off. You know, that famous quote from Hippocrates, the ancient forefather of modern medicine, let food be thy medicine, where that literal like ding, like I almost heard it in my head, was the same day all those pills went down the toilet. And I looked out at that lake. You can't see it right now, but I'll show you a pan of it in a second. I looked out that lake and I said, you know what? That lake is full of organic food that doesn't have all the toxins in the supermarket. This forest behind me is full of deer, bears, and venison, and wild ducks, and geese, and wild turkeys, etc., that don't contain all those harmful chemicals and antibiotics and steroids and etc., and all the preservatives and nonsense that goes into modern food. And I had a real light bulb moment where I changed my life and flushed those pills down the toilet and turned to functional and medicinal mushrooms and plants for medicine and changed my literal entire life. And I'm, without going into the very big long story of how that unfolded, I'm very happy to tell you now that many years later, I'm virtually most days symptom-free from this degenerative autoimmune condition that doctors all over the world told me didn't have a cure. And I'm living a healthy outdoor lifestyle. I've reduced stress. I got out of the very busy, chaotic, stressful business that I was in, the music business I was in for a long time. And I'm feeling like a champ most days, man. Like I get little flare-ups here and there from time to time, but the skin condition that plagued me for years is gone. Like it's gone. It disappeared within 6 months.
So like obviously, so year-round diet, lifestyle stuff. So how has Chaga specifically been incorporated into your...
Well, the Chaga fungus still to this day, like, and it's worth noting, you have to understand this. People who are in my condition are in so much pain all the time. I was popping anti-inflammatory pills and painkillers like a fucking junkie. Like I was taking 8 or 9 or 10 of them to get out of bed in the morning because, you know, there's a cumulative effect. You know, you start taking 2 or 3. Well, you know what? By year 4 or 5 of this, where everything's getting worse and worse, it just takes more medicine, more of those modern medicines to get you to the point where you can function. So I was popping them like a junkie, and then I started to learn all about, and I had some inkling of it. I've been using the Chaga fungus like recreationally and interested in it for much longer than I've been like a super nerd about it and teaching courses about it. But I knew that there were anti-inflammatory properties, and I started to do some experimentation with it. So that's how the Chaga fungus fit into my own health strategy, is that I noticed that, you know, building these compounds up in my system alleviated all that pressure, and I could physically see it in my hands, which used to look like, my fingers used to look like sausages some days. There was so much inflammation from the arthritis, especially in my knuckles, that I could see it working. And then I went down the massive deep dive and figured out a whole lot more about this fungus that I teach these courses about, etc. But the proof was in the pudding for me, was that with all the other, that holistic whole life change, was that this anti-inflammatory medicine, this super powerful anti-inflammatory, was growing right behind my house on a fucking tree. And it was hard for me to believe that to be true until it happened to me and it worked. You know what I mean? Like it was a crazy time in my life, and I'm like so grateful that I had the opportunity to first of all be here and change my life in the way that I did, and that I get to share this information with people the way we're trying to share it with you on this video today. Still to this day, like I don't know if they say this disease has no cure. Okay, so it might still be in there somewhere. It might be inside me, but if you don't have any symptoms, who cares? Like who fucking cares, bro? Like, I don't care. And this anti-inflammatory medicine I still use on a regular basis. And I know that it's helping me. I put myself on courses of it. We'll talk about dosage in a second. But that's like, in a nutshell, the short version of my story. How do you and Chris use it at home?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big advocate for like using a number, like I use lots of different organisms, but Chaga is one of the functional mushrooms. So primarily it's a medicine that I am using for like immune modulating to help support my immune system, particularly through the times of year that my immune system is most challenged. So I mostly I do teas through the winter, not so much through the summertime.
Yeah, I'm less in the summer too.
I feel like a lot of the immune supporting herbs that I take, it's like I try to like give my body a break. And like when I'm healthiest, then I don't need to like lean on them.
100%. Yeah.
And so
you have to let it rest too.
Yeah. So I do teas, like we've talked about. I often use like a number of the other mushrooms with them.
Yeah, I do a lot of multis as well.
The tinctures as well.
Tinctures and teas.
Tinctures and teas, and then I like to I'll use like warm chai spices along with them.
Nice.
So I do like a chaga.
Tasty.
Chaga chai is like.
This is one of the most delicious little things I've tried. It's got cinnamon in it. It's so good.
I'm a big advocate of like taking the things that are functional and then making them like really delicious.
Yeah. You're good at it too.
Yeah. So in teas, but often like with other of the functional mushrooms and chais, and I had skin cancer, and so skin cancer is like specific to working with chaga. Chaga is one that I am trying to work with for at least a good number of the months of the year, in hopes that I don't actually have to deal with skin cancer again.
Yeah, any kind of
remission. That is one of the. It's like. Again, there's all of the wide range of functional mushrooms and their amazing compounds, and then chaga, that's like one of the specific characteristics of the chaga, of like what we use it for.
Yeah. And there is some data on this as well. Yeah. Incomplete, but reducing metastasis of cancerous cells is one of the properties of the chaga fungus that's being heavily studied right now.
Yeah, and my partner deals with like kind of more chronic stomach stuff and had just actually gone through acute bout of like digestive distress, and so that was like when that came up, and he was on like a very restricted diet, and we were trying to deal with this like chronic inflammation in the digestive tract. Chaga was like one of the things. I was like, oh, we need
100%
brewing extra specific just to help ease the inflammation of this chronic.
So many folks with IBS and Crohn's, etc., reporting amazing anecdotal results with the chaga fungus.
Yeah, and again, combined with like other treatments,
100%.
And then it was like, but it was like one of the things that, for one, when his stomach was really sensitive. And he couldn't really, like, he was really, like, he would get a lot of, like, actual pain consuming a lot of things. I mean, it was actually something that, like, felt good. He could consume it. It felt good.
Went down, stayed down.
Stayed down. And so, again, and it was, like, one of our pieces in the holistic care of trying to get this digestive issue under control.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you guys are using it at home? I guess, like, we really need to wrap up this video. And look who's coming in. Here's little honey. She came in because she knows it's time to go home pretty soon. That was an awesome talk, Laura.
Yeah, we covered so many things. We covered, like, harvesting out in the field, preparation, a bunch of the studies,
dosage, usage, science,
personal uses. Yeah.
Can you even think of a more complete chaga video? I don't know if there's one on the internet. Recommend this one to a friend, share, okay? I wanted to just thank you for coming out to my neck of the woods. I know you have a busy day still ahead of you and you got to get going soon. But thanks for coming. That was an awesome video. I think folks are going to get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
I hope so, anyway.
We're going to include some more links and resources below.
Yeah, down in the description. Some of these books and resources that we showed you very briefly, maybe I'll link some of those down there. I'm going to put a link to Wild Muskoka down there if you want to check out some of Laura's products or even some of Laura's courses. She is a fine outdoor educator in her own right and does tons of courses as well. I'll put a link, booking link down to some of my courses. I want to mention, just because of the time frame that this is coming out, I've got a couple of really specific chaga focused workshops coming up, one on February 23rd and one on March 9th right here in Haliburton at the Haliburton Highlands Museum. I'll throw links down to those. And then I've got a whole giant host of outdoor education workshops based on these same subjects: wild plants and mushrooms, forest ecology, etc. All summer and fall long, and so does Laura. So I'll throw some of those links down there for you too. High five.
Yeah.
Woo. Woo. Catch you on the next one.
And there you have it, folks. That's the end of the third and final part of this comprehensive series on the chaga fungus. Huge thanks and shout out to my friend Laura for sharing so much information with you, and I want to thank you for hanging out to the end of the series. I hope you enjoyed these videos. I hope you learned a whole bunch of interesting, valuable stuff about the chaga fungus, and I hope you subscribe to this brand new channel for more videos every single week about hunting, fishing, foraging, organic gardening, living a healthy outdoor lifestyle, and using food as medicine. See y'all next week. Cheers.